Can I tell you, before we dive into the music and everything? So today I had to get a new phone. And can I tell you, technology has really progressed since I last got a phone. Because it's kind of been an embarrassingly long time since I've gotten a new phone. And I don't buy new things for myself, it's just not my thing. But I was kind of forced into getting a new phone because all of my apps and everything on my phone, little by little, over the past month or so, has been saying, yeah, this app is unusable unless you upgrade. And this is unusable unless you upgrade. And I suppose, in their defense, I really haven't gotten a new phone in a relatively long time. Like, I use Samsung and I stick with like the Galaxy. The Galaxies are up in the 20s now. I'll just say this. I was in the single digits with what I had. So it was time. So I've been just sitting here, setting up the new phone, transferring things, doing this, doing that, and I need a break. So we're breaking with Bartók is what we're doing. We are going to listen to some Bela Bartók with Piano Concerto number 2. Numero dos is what we're going to check out here. We are listening to this because this was suggested and sponsored by Sylvain. Sylvain, thank you so much for the recommendation. Thank you for the support. And thank you for a break away from all of that mess and hopefully into something a little bit more pleasant. So I appreciate that. We're going to be diving into the full piano concerto here. We're going to be listening to the version here from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra that we'll be checking out. And I hope that you guys are excited for it. Hope that you're here for it. I don't think we've ever covered anything from him on the channel, looking at it, from what I can tell. I do know that ELP, I guess specifically Emerson, was a fan of Bartók and has been inspired by several of his works, because I remember seeing his name pop up many a time as we listened to a lot of ELP. So will anything in here sound familiar? Couldn't tell you. But we'll dive into it regardless. We'll discuss it a little bit after. Let's pull up the music, take a break from our phones, and here we go. Cheerful. Stop left hand. Hold your attention. I can hear why ELP was a fan. I can hear it. Love the sense of piano. It's so fun. notice those up sweeps there. God, I can hear how Emerson was so inspired by this. You can hear it. It shifted into something very royal and elegant here. Piano's magical. That coalesce right there was brilliant, that climax. It's like the low keys and high keys are chasing each other back and forth. For a movement that's so imaginative and all over the place in a sense, it has a really strong theme to it, which is really fantastic. Okay, second movements. Just wanted to sneak that in. Change in mood. That is so calming. In contrast to the opening movement. This is such an ashes after the war of the previous movement. I like how the piano stomps out in its isolation, harsh and heavy. Oh. That sounds like another piece. Kind of like bump the Flight of the Bee or whatever for a second. Even the piano is so percussive. Here's that return. Wow. With those strings coming right back like that. Into this moment of floating serenity. Huh. return to that is so good. I really love this bed and how it continuously returns to this. That is really fantastic. Final chord ringing out in the back. This second movement was beautifully serene, tranquil in places, but then the waves started to roar and have this really fun progressive play. Okay, I'll be quiet. Sorry. Reference to that second movement again. climb up. Listen to the piano playing in the in the ashes of stars right there. Like harp. I love how it went through all these different feelings and emotions of darkness, light, down and up and left and right. And at the end, it rushes towards this kind of happy ending. Like musically, it just sounds like the raining of positivity there at the end as it rushes up. Okay, it ends triumphantly. These three movements in this particular concerto are so perfect in the sense of they each sound so unified, and yet they each sound so thematically different from one another, but still being a perfect part of the entire body of work. Quickly summarizing, the first movement is progressive, adventurous, sets a brilliant scene, and is dazzling in all of its movement. The second is darker, slower, moodier, a little bit more subtle in its approach, and has a wonderful back and forth between the more acrobatic movements of the piano and the atmospheres that dwell under it and around it. And the third movement is just a triumphant charge, a big horse-led front down a hill towards victory. And it hits every single aspect in big, outrageous, exuberance. Let's just go with that. And it truly tells a journey and a story as it does so. So I'll tell you what I was thinking of throughout, but I don't want to I don't want to go too far into it, because with classical music and instrumental music specifically, my mind always goes to imageries and stories and different things. And this brought a very specific one to my mind, but I'll bring it up a little bit later. So that first movement, I mentioned already that ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, were already very inspired by Bartók, especially in their compositions, and Emerson really so. And it's in that first movement that I really hear just why Emerson was so inspired by them, or inspired by Bartók, because you can hear ELP in this. Obviously, you hear Bartók and ELP, but you know what I mean for context. It is so cool how progressive it is in this particular relation, and how ELP were able to take music like this and bring it into their version of progressive rock. And I'm just speaking for myself here. Listening to that first movement is really nostalgic for me, because it reminds me of ELP. And ELP is one of those bands that, I discovered here on the channel with you guys many years ago. And it brings me back to that time. If I'm being 100% honest, it brings me back to that time of discovering ELP and Genesis. And yes, in not in their heyday necessarily, but in their heyday. And that's just a very nostalgic thing for me. So listening to that and kind of hearing the sounds, it kind of brought me back to listening to that debut album from ELP again. And, The Barbarian, and how abrasive that was and how shocking it was for me. It's just cool to kind of, hear that inspiration now in its original form. So that first movement was just everywhere. And like I said, brash and abrasive and strong-armed is what I felt listening to it. The piano was heavy. Actually, at a lot of points during the whole piece, the piano was very heavy in a sense of it felt like a percussion instrument amongst the rest of here. Yeah, no, not even take into account the heaviness of the timpani when that would come, and the rolling drums and the horns, the strings, and different things. No, even taking that away from that, the piano was just played extremely heavy-handed in certain moments. But in a lot of places, the piano played incredibly light to the point you could barely hear the notes that were being played. And sometimes those notes that were being played very fast. But it was just this quiet march, these quiet steps and quick steps of the piano that were just going. And I just love how the volume control really added a certain kind of ambience to that. That first part, that first movement, brilliant in how it sets certain themes and a lot of themes and hits all those expectations and really sets the roof on fire. But then we get into the second movement. And it took me by the second movement, the opening of the second movement, took me by as much surprise as the opening of the final movement. Because the final movement, it's obvious in how it surprises you. It just, boom, cannon fire into your face, muskets overhead. But the second movement, off of the back of the first, cools things down and immediately throws us into this serene, cool water. And we just float there and relax and reflect in the moonlight. And you just sit there as the strings gently create a soft back and forth and rise and fall of these waves. And we just lay in this pool. And it is so different from what we heard previously. Like, let me pull it back up here again. All this is so different from this. We're transported. And this whole second movement, it gets a little something halfway through. But for a great portion of this, it's very just melancholic and just calm and tranquil. It's very peaceful and relaxing, and you can't help but get sucked into that particular vortex of peace. And it feels so good, especially as a contrast to that first movement. I think that was incredibly shocking in that transition, how it leads into it. But it feels so good. And I love how we get a little bit of respite there as well. And then the piano comes in and moves in the same way. Barely a ripple upon the pool that was drawn in there. However, eventually the piano does begin to play a little bit more. And even when it does, yes, it stirs the waters. Yes, it disturbs the peace. But the peace isn't lost. Because one of the coolest things about that middle section, the second movement, is that bed of ambience that's created by the strings. It never leaves. And even when it does, it always comes back. And so you have this kind of back and forth that happens. Even as the piano begins to go off and dilly-dally a little more, it will always return to that bed of calm. And it's just really cool if you just to segment this and really just look at this second movement. It's really cool how that happens and how it goes back and forth. Before it reaches a certain height, it pulls it back, exercises restraint, and gives us respite in the pool again. And I think that was so incredible how that was done. It was so composed and structured out. You know, this is lovely to listen to. And it's like almost 9 o'clock right now at night, and this is great. And then, like I said, you have the little bits of piano make their appearance. Cool. It interrupts the bed, but eventually the bed comes back. But eventually, it disturbs the water, right? And the piano really takes charge. As opposed to the first movement where you have, more instruments and stuff, here the piano is really doing the heavy lifting in those particular moments. But even still, it always returns to the bed. I was trying to find the bed. There's some of those quick notes. Playing the same notes as well. There's your bed. So it's just really incredible how it goes back and forth so able and so wonderfully. Building tension in a certain way, but also having a big way of release. How gorgeous is that, right? And some of the patterns in the melodies reminded me. Like it was kind of maybe even in a certain way kind of paying homage to that. I don't know. It sounded like some of those notes were the same to me. Okay. And then the third movement, let me show you this. The transition from the first movement to the second. That is so ELP. Right? Into the second movement. Kind of heard it already, but you know, this fade in of calm. Relax. Draw the waters to yourself. Dip your toes, ankles, calves, knees, thighs, waist. Lower yourself into the water. But you know how this transitions into the third movement? I'll tell you how it transitions into the third movement. Transitions with the timpani percussionist. Bang! And as if that's not telling you what's going to happen, you're about to soon find out, as it truly lives up to its finale and the name of that, because it goes out with fireworks everywhere. The smoke barely clears. This feels like the final triumphant charge down the hill towards the enemy to win the battle once and for all. And it is a bloody battle. I mean, it is exuberant. And whereas the first movement, I would say, is a little bit heavier in a certain respect and perhaps a little bit darker in the chords and the way they play, the third, the final, is, like I said, more triumphant. It feels already victorious, like it's just declaring victory at this point, while still maintaining a lot of those heavier acrobatics in the playing. And the piano really gets to let loose here amongst the strings, amongst the storm. But it's definitely more playful. Look at that. That section was super impressive. There were a lot of them that were impressive, but that part, the follow-up, the back and forth, the leading and the following between between piano and the strings was just intense and intensified even further and exponentially before eventually, you know, they kind of break away from each other. And, you know, it's interesting, you know, the second movement was 11 minutes and, you know, we were allowed to sit and relax for the most part. You know, of course, we got a little bit more up and frantic and such. But this one is the shortest. And it's a quick path to victory because like we heard at the end, it rushes towards this happy finale right here. It's just happily running up. That's running the flagpole up. That's running the flag up the flagpole of victory, whoever those victors may be. Okay, so all of that being considered, this is what I had in my mind. Can I bring you guys up here real quick? I gotta pull something up before I bring you up here. So while I was listening to this, I'm bringing up my Goodreads. While I was listening to this, it made me think of Circe, Greek mythological figure, but specifically because I had read a book this year about Circe. It made me think of that. Let me pull my challenge up here. You guys can see the books I'm reading. I'm currently reading Blood Meridian. It's a book. Circe, there you go. All right, Circe by Madeline Miller, okay? This one, I liked this book. Basically what it is, it's talking about the Greek goddess, Greek witch Circe, and it's a fictional story on mythology, so I guess you could say a fiction upon fiction. But it's really cool because the basic plot of the story is just following her life, and she's living with the gods in her youth. She gets kicked out of Olympus. She gets kicked out and, you know, abandoned on an island, and that's where she makes her home. She's scorned by the gods, her brothers, her sisters, her family, and she's just pretty much left to make do and live her life out there, whatever. On the island, she eventually, you know, makes the island of her own. She befriends different animals, begins to grow plants, make a home out of it. And randomly people will visit, of course, the most popular of those being Odysseus. And, you know, people visit, whether with good intention or bad, and it goes on from there. Okay. So as I was listening to this is just me. This is where my mind went. The first movement, I was just seeing the life of the Greek gods. I don't know why, but my mind went immediately to mythology and the love, the lust, the betrayal, the jealousy, the violence, the war, all of that encompasses their lives. And I guess in my mind, I was kind of specifically following the story of Circe here. And then at the end of the first movement, Circe's kicked out. Pew, up, dropped off on her little island. So she's isolated there, just as the music in that second movement is isolated and calm for a moment. But then as it reaches that halfway point in the piano being Circe, like it begins to spring out a little bit more. She's becoming more comfortable with her situation first, just dropped in the middle of nowhere, but then making that nowhere home. And then, as the piano would have more drama, that's the drama of people showing up and things that she would encounter. And then the finale, the third movement, is kind of her gaining that confidence, finding her place in the world, sticking it to the gods above, and then end. So my mind was actually following this book and the story of the book while I was listening to the music. That was a really, really good book. I enjoyed my read of it. Let's look at some of the information for this, shall we? It was composed between 1930 and 31. It's notorious for being one of the most difficult pieces in the repertoire. I can imagine that, especially with the piano playing. In approaching the composition, Bartók wanted the music to be more contrapuntal. He also wanted to simplify his music, like many of his contemporaries. But his use of counterpoint in this piece makes for an extremely complicated piece of music. You could say that again. This aspect have proven particularly troublesome in the first concerto, so much so, in fact, that the New York Philharmonic, which was to have given the premiere, could not master it in time. Wow. They said, yeah, we need more time on this one. Right now it's rare, and we need to cook this thing to at least a medium rare. And we can't do it. The composer himself claimed in a 1939 article to have composed this concerto as a direct contrast to his first, acknowledging that the first is a bit difficult, one might even say very difficult, as much for orchestra as for audience. Even so, the second is notorious for its difficulty as well. Andras Schiff said for the piano player, it is a finger-breaking piece. It is probably the single most difficult piece that I have ever played, and I usually end up with a keyboard covered in blood. Stephen Kovacevic also declared that it is the most technically demanding piece he had ever played, and that he nearly paralyzed his hands preparing for the piece. Premiered in 1933. The first performance in Hungary was later that same year. Jeez. Bartók himself played the work at a BBC symphony concert in Queen's Hall in 1933. The concert was broadcast live and described in Radio Times as the first performance in England. He played it again at the Proms in London, and so on and so forth. The piano's quick rhythmic pace and fragmentary scalar movement suggest the influence of Stravinsky and the ballet Petrushka, in particular, while other characteristics point to the Firebird. I didn't catch that. I guess Firebird isn't what came to mind, but I can hear a little bit of that. I can definitely hear that. Some notable recordings as well. Jeez. I'm kind of curious, if you don't mind indulging me, while I'm not playing any sort of full video of the concerto because of copyright and I'm not trying to get in trouble, I am curious. Just a few seconds. This is Yuha Wang, who we've covered before. I want to see something. I can't play too much. I gotta be careful. But that's incredible. This is truly, truly incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. I appreciate you watching, Sylvain. Thank you so much for the recommendation, for the request, for the support. Truly appreciate the introduction to Bartók properly here. I hope that you guys have a fantastic night. Let me know what you guys thought about this. Did you guys follow a journey in the movements, see anything in the movements, anything like that? Love to hear your thoughts. I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks for being here as always, and come back tomorrow. Bye, guys.